Hey there, folks, and welcome back to the Northern Fútbol Podcast, episode 217 of NFP. Ben Steiner alongside Brendan Dunlop and Alex Gonki-Ruzik. And it was an exciting week for Canadian soccer. I mean, I can't remember the last time we had a questions tweet or Blue Sky post get as much traction as it did. Of course, thank you all for your contributions to this show. It wouldn't be the same without you guys asking questions. An exciting week. Daniel Jebbison into the Canadian picture, Promise David into the Canadian picture, of course, broken by friend of the show, Josh Cloak. The Canadian women's national team won. MLS started. Jane Nelson looks like the next coming of Alphonso Davies. There was a lot going on this weekend. Brendan, just, have you caught your breath over the last few days from this weekend?
And people think that March is the best month of the new year. Yeah, right. How about the middle of February? In between a couple of snowstorms, Canada Soccer delivers.
And the snow melted in Toronto.
Melting. I'm still driving through snow traffic. I mean, traffic is horrendous when you can add snow traffic to it because you have all these normal streets that become one lanes, or you have to beach yourself so that someone can pass and then hope the next person does this. I'm sick of it. I'm done. I've a few days of that. Fine. Now let's get it out of here. Bring back the nicer temperatures. But I'm gonna miss the ODRs, man. I was thinking about it. You and I haven't gone for a rip yet. My kid loves it. I'm gonna miss the ODRs. That makes me sad when we're I think today is +5. They're melting away.
It's supposed to be -16 on Saturday, so
okay,
it's not all gone yet. Yeah.
Don't have to worry about that. What I'll say though about this weekend, I'll say this very tongue in cheek, and it's a transition into what we're talking about. But no matter what happens, I find like Canada men's or women's put in some big performances. Some MLS can start as it has. Lots going on in the CPL, NSL. What I've come to realize, and it's very tongue in cheek, but it's facts and it's kind of exciting. We're a dual national country. For whatever reason, like there's just something that gets people going. That's dual nationals, and both exciting when you're on the right side of a commitment, frustration, rage, anger when you're on the wrong side. It's just something about dual nationals that gets the people going. And just a week like this, we get two pretty high profile commitments in terms of names people recognize, names people wanted. Like it makes you realize that at the end of the NFP, we're a dual national podcast. I mean, I guess it makes sense. We're all dual nationals. So on a week like this one, we just got to embrace it. And I'm kind of hyped to dive into it because so many good questions. I just love the energy that comes out for dual nationals. We're going to have to just embrace that, like Canada, dual national country.
Yeah, I think part of that's probably because it almost feels like winning a match against the other nation that had claim to that player that is now going to suit up for Canada. So it's a little bit more to England. Yeah,
it's like get these all insert whatever term you feel about England and their certain political sides and monarchy and all that.
Yeah, it comes from a place of insecurity, though. It comes from the loss of the past, right? And it comes from missing out on Hargraves and missing out on Jonathan de Guzman. That's why people are jacked about it.
Omar Marmouche.
Tomori to a lesser extent. Yeah, we are a nation of immigrants. This is a team, a great immigrant story, but we're also a nation of expats. So yeah, a dual national country is definitely the description.
So Jebbison, of course, committing to Jesse Marsch's Canada after Jesse Marsch was at the Bournemouth game over the weekend. He's picking Canada over England. Promise David also filing his one-time switch from Nigeria over to Canada as well. Alex, I know you have different thoughts than some of the larger public on these two players. What do you see in these two players as just an initial reaction to committing to the men's national team?
Yeah, I mean, lots to be excited about in terms of depth. That's the big thing, is that you've just added two strikers that can compete for minutes. And I know we've been talking a lot about hypotheticals, but man, I just look at Jonathan David, Kyle Larin. If you're entering this next camp with them as starters, well, then you just look behind them for names ready to step up, right? Like you got Promise David now, Daniel Jebbison on top of Theo Baer. You got Jason Russell Rowe, Tani Oluwaseyi. You got Charles Andreas Brim quietly finding a little bit of form. Like that's just, off the top of my head. There's more that are, in MLS. There's guys firing. Like there's just so much depth that if Larin struggles or, David and Larin, there's injuries happen, things happen where they're not available. all of a sudden you're feeling pretty confident of, okay, Laren's down, Promise David steps up. Okay, Jonathan David maybe is unavailable. Okay, maybe one of these guys can step up and fill his position. It's just huge for the depth. I mean, the one right now I'm really excited about is Promise David. I've been excited about it. And just the way this year has gone so perfectly for him in terms of the way he's grown into a role at Union Saint-Gilloise, a club that has a reputation for selling guys on. It's so fascinating too that he's 23. It's a late bloomer. His story of being in Estonia like 8 months ago, and now he's out here becoming one of the hottest properties in Belgian football, and I'm sure soon in Europe if he continues. Like, he's exciting. I think that's something where I just see a trajectory where he's going to make another move. That's what Union Saint-Gilloise does. We've talked about Victor Boniface. I just see such a strong parallel. I'm very excited, and I love how much his game's grown. Daniel Jebbison's an interesting one because the pedigree is already there versus a Promise David. Like, he's playing in the Premier League. He's played in the Premier League. With him, though, it feels like, at least in my opinion, there's a bit of a rockier path to the first team just because the last 4 years, it hasn't been that same linear growth. Like, he hit such a high at 17. He scored against Everton. Everyone saw that goal, a Canadian scoring in the Premier League. Since then, it's just not been the progress we wanted to see. Part of it out of his control with the injuries, the blood clots last year. So for Jebbison, maybe there was a lot weighing on him, such as his international future. I just want to see him settle, find a role, be it with Bournemouth or somewhere else, and develop, because there's a lot of potential there. We just haven't seen as much growth. So it's exciting because with this Canadian pool, you're not asking Jebbison to come in and be a 90-minute starter. In fact, he might not even make the next squad, but the fact that you can have him in the mix is so huge and encouraging.
It's that Premier League premium, right? And we see it in so many other countries with if you play for the big clubs, like how many guys on Manchester United only have a handful of games under their belt for the senior team, and then they get the England call up. It's like it's the same thing, and it's not unique to Canada. I agree that the hype for Jebbison maybe is like a little overblown. I'm also surprised that he's only going to be 22 this year. I feel like you're talking about late bloomers. I feel like he's someone that's been around for a long time, and we've been waiting for a commitment the same way we waited for Junior Hoylett. It feels like that length to me, someone who's been on the scene, but maybe hasn't ticked all the boxes or built the stat sheet that you'd expect, but he's always been spoken about. So I'm interested to see how his journey with Canada goes. Obviously, he's got a good relationship, it seems, with Jesse Marsch, who has one hell of a sales pitch, to be able to pull the guys in like this. I mean, it helps having a home World Cup, certainly, but it's great timing all around.
Yeah, I do wonder how much that home World Cup does matter into all of this, as well as, other countries potentially struggling in World Cup qualifiers. Nigeria hasn't had the best World Cup qualifying pathway yet. They'll probably get into it considering the amount of teams that are going to be at the World Cup. But how much do you think that hosting this World Cup is actually a draw, even though it's, it could just be 3 games?
It's one tournament as well, though, right? I think in general that you look at these guys are looking at themselves as brands. In the past, for Jonathan de Guzman, for example, does he have higher earning potential as a Canadian international or as a Dutch international? Even if he only plays, and I think he only had 14 caps. He has a much higher income potential through sponsorships, through his each salary negotiation. Being a Dutch international, I think that it has changed now for Canadian players, and when they're weighing up what their other options are, does Daniel Jebbison have a higher earning potential as a 30 cap England international? Yes, but is he going to get 30 caps? Probably not. Something I think Tomori is regretting as well. And as a Canadian, in comparison to Nigeria, in Promise David's case, I think that they can look at that and think that it's a pretty good ticket to have now, which really wasn't the case 5 or 10 years ago. Certainly, I feel like that we'll be talking about that feeling as the Alphonso Davies effect, and it's slow. There's still a lot of ignorance when it comes to Canadians. But as I've said in this pod before too, the better that American players perform, the better the perception of Canadians is, I think, in Europe. And these Canadians who are individually doing bigger and better things, now they're at a point where that passport is a positive in comparison to some of the other countries they might be eligible for.
Well, I think the World Cup is tangible. Like, it's now like a year away. It's happening. It's real. the reality is we can sit here and, we'll see the future, we'll see potential, in football and soccer for these athletes. You have to focus on the next month, 2 months, 6 months. You can't be looking 5 years in the future because so much can happen. You can be at a club, coach can get fired, and all of a sudden you're out of a club you thought you'd be at for a decade. Or your knee could give out, and all of a sudden your earning potential completely drops. I think if we're sitting there in Tomori's position in 2021, we're thinking, okay, there's a chance for 22, there's 26, but we're taking a longer view of things where he's maybe thinking like, okay, if I make England, I'm guaranteed to go to 22 and be a contender, and then I can make 2026 again. And there's just so much more. Whereas now you're heading into 2025 for a lot of these players. The fact that there's a World Cup next year, it means all this potential we've been speaking about with Canada becomes a tangible, real thing. Like players are going to be able to commit and feel the effect of, oh wow, like we're about to be superstars in Canada, right? Like people are there's going to be household names. We started to see it over Copa America and, the World Cup qualifying run where people know Davids, and then they're starting to know some of the adjacent stories. Now, like everyone on whoever makes a 23 or 26 player roster, however it's big for 2026, like those guys are going to be rock stars. Everyone's going to remember that team that hosted a World Cup, and hopefully they make some noise. But, now with Jesse Marsch and how things have gone, there's a chance they make noise. There's a chance in 21 if you're Tomori looking, okay, I commit and we go, so what? We go 3-0 or 0-3. We get grouped. What was worth it? Now you look at this team and you're thinking, all right, like this is a team that should go win a World Cup game. This is a team that should get out their group, go on a run. And that as well adds to it. So I think that effect, players are looking like, oh, this is really something you want to be on board now. And the fact that if you're maybe in no man's land, if you haven't committed to anything, like no better time to get on it while you still have that 12 to 16 months of runway.
It would be a great game to play, Ben, because we don't have any sponsors to offend, is pick the star for the brand that you think should run commercials during the 2026 World Cup. Because I don't think anybody had Kyle Larin and Osmo's Shawarma Shop being the hit of the World Cup for 2022. I'm thinking Alistair Johnson has to be with a domestic beer producer. And if I'm Molson and I'm trying to get a bigger cut of the general marketplace as Canadian falls behind some of these fit brands and Mickey Slims, is that what you guys call Michelob Ultras? Right?
It's all by Canadian here on Northern Football.
So Stefano Stacchio is definitely getting a razor sponsorship with how sharp his goatee is. So
that's what I'm. Yeah,
well, he's bound for Gillette with Grady Dick.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think that I would rephrase that. Don't sit down for Gillette with Grady Dick. That sounds weird. Particularly for, I would say, probably 88% of our listeners. I have no idea that Grady Dick plays for the Toronto Raptors. But yes, I got it. I also think Gillette is definitely the match. So we've already got two. Alistair Johnson, Molson Canadian, Stefano Stacchio, Gillette. We can go on and on for this.
Yeah, this might be like an NFP extra. We'll jump into it maybe.
Moise Bombito needs something related to speed too. I don't know if there's something like maybe like an energy drink or something. I feel like there's a good there's a good link there to be had.
Yeah, you know what it's gonna be though? It's gonna be internet connection maybe, or it'll be for how quickly you can get like a car insurance quote. Because they did that with Andre DeGrasse, and I'm like, is this going to be an insurance commercial? It's just building. Like, oh my God, it is. That would be it.
The big question is who's going to get Canadian Tire?
That's got to be like someone like tucks in their shorts, like wears a little old school boots. Like,
is Piet on the roster in 26?
That's why I say Piet rigs it, but I feel like Piet, like he'll sponsor something from home, like a Quebec company to make sure like there's a good local Montreal brand not represented. Like Piet feels like a guy who'll look out for that. So the next best thing would be like, I don't know. It's good. Like Johnston, funnily enough, I think would be a great Canadian Tire plug if you're not going for the beers. Like he just kind of gives that like no nonsense, kind of sometimes plays like a right defenseman in hockey. Like I think he really fit the Canadian Tire mold.
Max Crepeau could be a Canadian Tire. With the glasses, I see him like in the plaid. He's like standing out in the outdoors section, right?
Yeah, that's it. Swinging an axe and be like, hey, sometimes I save my defenders, but also sometimes
yeah, Ali Ahmed on a bike like that. I feel like you can have Ali Ahmed doing Canadian Tire stuff.
Could certainly be a versatile game that we could go on forever. But David and Jebbison, of course, are on the 60-man provisional roster, which Canada Soccer announced on Monday, including the usual suspects, but also a couple NFP favorites in Dio Mercy Michel and Jovan Ivancevich. All guys we've talked about at length, especially you, Alex, here on Northern Football And from Johnny Depp and Ferks, thoughts on Ivan, the Bologna center back, and do you think that he has potential to play for the first team and maybe make the World Cup squad? And what has Jebbison been up to lately for those not keeping up with him?
Well, to start with Ivanisevic, I mean, he obviously made a big move in January because we spoke about him, I think, last summer because he was in Croatia. He makes a move to Bologna on loan, has been playing for their U21 team. I think it's just exciting. Hopefully, like this whole deal, the plan is for him to just finish the season with the U21s. Bologna likes what they see. They make it permanent. And next year he has a path towards the first team. If that's what happens, I think there's every shot he has of making the World Cup squad. Of course, it'll depend on how that progress goes. But when you look at the center back depth, if he's playing even semi-sporadic minutes for Bologna, given his age, he's still super young, like I could see him very well making the roster as a fourth CB, even a third CB. It'll be a bit short of a timeline to make it as a starter, but I don't know. I'm super excited. It's great that Jesse Marsch got eyes on him, that he's got him in this provisional squad, because I think he could be a very good piece long term. In terms of Jebbison, just to, I guess, add to what I mentioned earlier, the big thing with Jebbison is just, I think he needs consistent minutes. I think this Bournemouth move is actually going to be doing a lot of good behind the scenes for him that maybe we're not seeing, because they've got incredible attack, super well coached. You've seen it with Iraola. Like, they score goals for fun. It's fluid. He asks his players to be creative. Like, there was a great article in The Athletic actually this week on Iraola, who used to play in New York City for Ben. I know that's fun, MLS link there, but how he wants to coach his players. He doesn't want to overcoach them. He wants them to play with some freedom, have some fun. And I think that'll be good for Jebbison, because the reality is, ever since that Sheffield goal, first, he just never really fit. Like, when he went to Sheffield United, it just wasn't working for him. He never got the regular role. He went out on some loans, looked great at the League One level, but then he goes back to the championship level. It didn't stick. When I watched him earlier this year, he was really struggling with his fitness, which for a striker, you need to be able to make those runs. And he was just struggling to get up and down the field at a level, at a pace that's required to play at the Premier League level, where it's kind of breakneck. I think what's nice at Bournemouth is he's going to develop that fitness side, because all their forwards are quick, rapid. They can go end to end. He's going to get some of that freedom in his game. And I think if he can do that, add a little muscle, just get all that sharpness back, there's going to be a player in there. Like, you can see the potential, but for right now, for Jebbison, it's a lot of working on small deliverables I'm seeing. Because we know he can score. We know he can be a menace in the box. I'm looking fitness, strength. That's all little things that he's going to grow. And that's what I want to see from him.
I feel like when Canada went to Qatar and Ike Ugbo was emerging as the third option up front, it felt like, oh, good thing we've got like a valuable third option. You're not going with a false nine, Jonathan Osorio, or someone that doesn't have even that pedigree, or someone with, at the time, as little experience as Tani Olose. Whereas now I feel like from 3 to 7, it's all pretty tight, and they're all guys that if they had to be number 2, you, like Tani, you wouldn't feel so down about, or you wouldn't be afraid of. This is the first time I've looked at a 60-man provisional roster and thought, wow, there's 2 very competitive teams there. Like, you could pick the next set of 23 to send to the Gold Cup, and I feel like they have a chance to win. And I've never said that with a Canadian squad. There's been deep provisional rosters. There's been some guys that unfairly, can't make the numbers, can't make the cut, and they probably deserve more caps than they got. But I've never felt the depth like that. And that's exciting for the Gold Cup, because I think this is a year where we're, I'd be very interested to see if this Gold Cup is treated as previous, or if Canada, Mexico, and the US have to force a few more guys in there. So no, we're not going to see Davies. We're not going to see David. But the last Gold Cup in 23, where we missed the top 6 guys, if not the top 8, if I'm not mistaken. Well, this feels like a year where you should probably miss the top 8 again. But I don't know if that'll be the case. When I look at that provisional roster, they're going to be fine. You can miss the top 12 guys, I feel like. And that's still a good Canada team that's reflective of how far it's come and how much stronger it is now than even 2 years ago, the World Cup.
And you mentioned Ugbo there. He is not on that 60-man roster.
He's done.
It seems like he's done.
Out of the picture, for sure. He can link up in Dubai with Steven Vittoria and Milan Borjan and enjoy some pops.
Hey, Vittoria's playing in Portugal again. He made his Boavista debut this weekend against Benfica. funny coincidence. One of my buddies was out at that game. So I was like, hey, you saw a Canadian icon play. But with Ugbo, yeah, look, I just think now there's such a big mountain to climb that it's just, I don't see it happening. And I think Marsch has probably made it clear, like, look, EK, if you want to play, like, ball's in your court. Like, if he's going to go on, find some form, score, I don't think Marsch will be in a position to ignore. But the reality is, with all this depth, every game that goes by and a Promise David scores for his club, every camp that goes by and hungry guys like Tani Oluwaseyi comes in and puts in a shift. And I'm sure Promise David, Daniel Jebbison, these guys will have points to prove, and they'll come into camp, with their asses on fire, so to speak, ready to make an impact. That just pushes Ugbo down and down. And the reality is, he's having a pretty awful season right now. I think there's no other way to put it. He went back to Sheffield Wednesday, got a permanent move, and I don't think he's scored in the championship. He had his goal against like some League 4 team, or not League 4, League 2 team early in the year in Cup, and since then he's just not scored. He's barely been making an impact going out there. When he starts, they yank him off at 60, and he hasn't done much. If he sometimes coming off the bench at 89, which is not exactly a glowing sign of confidence for a guy who helped save Sheffield Wednesday from relegation last year. Like, I just think right now with his play, he's pushed him down to 8, 9 in the depth chart, and that's a big, big mountain to overcome. And the thing is with Ugbo, the talent's there. I said it when he committed. Like, he was probably Canada's best pure number 9 at the time. If anything, you look at the pool based on his body of work when he's firing, he might still be that guy now. Problem is, it's just been inconsistency, and with hungry guys ahead of him in the pecking order, it's hard to see that changing over the next 12 to 18 months.
And Brendan, also on Ugbo, like, where do you think things went wrong with him in terms of his development as a player? Like, where did this step off when you sort of now see him as a player that's on the outs?
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on him, to be honest, but I think that either, at the time when he committed, the program was such in a different spot where he felt like, being the third guy was very much within reach and kind of his spot to lose, let's say. A confident player that bet on himself. And he also, I think it committing to Canada at that time, he looked at that as giving him better club opportunities. It hasn't worked out at club level. It's a lot of travel. I don't know what his personal connection is to the country, but you kind of stack those two things up, and it feels like a easy thing to let go or not prioritize. And we've seen that with dual nationals, Americans, and some Mexican players as well that go abroad, where it totally changes up the international experience when you're squeezing in flights and all these connections for these CONCACAF dates that just make it very hard to be an international. And I think at the point in his career, with the shift change with Jesse Marsch, he just thought, look, I feel like this is I feel like he made the decision around Copa that, like, I know what I'm doing here by not taking this call up. I think my international career might be done, and he's got to focus on his club career. And to Alex's point, he really has to focus on his club career because he's not an international right now.
Well, the big thing too, I'll add on Ugbo, is that for him, his best seasons have come when he's uncomfortable, when he's in bad situations or things where he really needs to like step up. Like, if you look at him, he was in Chelsea. It's so tough to break through. He had some loans, and then he went to like the second Dutch division, popped off, maybe realized like, oh shoot, I'm going to this level. Got to make some happen. Then he went to Cercle Bruges, right? It was maybe not one of the big Belgian clubs. He popped off, gets on the radar. He goes to another top Belgian club in Genk. It was, he's kind of struggles a bit, makes the move, permanent move. Okay, they're like, all right, enough. We're gonna send you on loan. At Troyes, he thrives. He has that scene where he scores against PSG. Everything's going great. He's got a little of that pressure, and then he signs permanently for Troyes. And then he struggles, and it's kind of like, and then same thing happened. He goes back to England. He goes to Sheffield Wednesday. He's helping them survive relegation. He's playing for a contract. Boom, everything clicks, because that first half of the year at Cardiff, where things were a bit comfortable, he'd gotten that original loan. He struggled. Feels like for whatever reason, whenever things are sorted, he struggles to replicate the same levels that when maybe there's a risk of where's that next contract, etc. And I think for sometimes that's just players, right? You always hear about players. Sometimes contract years where you're getting the big performances. for Ugbo, for whatever reason, that's also been something that I think's hurt him a bit in terms of his club career.
Good
And
points.
from Feja on Blue Sky, and Brendan, we'll put this to you first. If you had to pick some of these Canadian strikers, you can't include them all on the Gold Cup or the Nations League roster. We've got 6 on the Nations League preliminary roster, and David, Laren, Baird, Jebbison, Jason Russell-Rowe, Taniel O'Shea, and Dio Mercy-Michel. If you had to pick 2 or 3 to make the Nations League roster and 3 or 4 to make the Gold Cup roster, which ones are you going with?
I think your boy Michel's not making either, so I'll rule him out. I think that Nations League is obviously David and Laren. I'm only getting 3, so I'm picking who do I think is the third guy to go along with them.
Let's go 3 or 4.
Marsch, 3 or 4. Well, Tawny, I feel like, because I think he earned it from his Copa play. I know Canadians hate that he didn't put the ball in the net, but the fact that he got into the team like that he forced his way in ahead of guys who had more international experience. I think he's probably 3, and I think Theo Bair is probably 4. I think Jason Russell-Rowe has a real opportunity to be a star at the Gold Cup. I don't know who would be alongside him there. You're not getting David or Laren, I think. I'd be very surprised if Laren felt he needed to participate. But he might be in a situation where he feels he needs to be around to not lose his place, and then he might need the form because he's not getting the minutes at Mallorca that you need. I think at his age, and to be an undeniable number 1, number 2 for a top 3 team in your region.
So no Promise David or Daniel Jebbison within that group.
Well, no, you can get those guys in the Gold Cup then. Jason Russell-Rowe, especially if Jason Russell-Rowe is number 1 for the Gold Cup, then I think Promise David would be number 2. I think Jebbison has an opportunity. I think Canadians want to see him, and Marsch wants to see him. So Gold Cup could be it. And in the past, they've carried like 5. You can manipulate the wingers and your midfield count before. So I wouldn't be surprised if find a way to get 5 of those guys in for the Gold Cup.
I think the sweet spot, especially with Marsch playing 2 up front, is 4. Like, just so you have cover at each position. 5 gets a little crowded, I find. You can get away with it with 26, but if we're assuming 23 here. For Nations League, I'm going to go David Laren. I said it earlier. Right now, and honestly, this depends on the week, depends on the day, depends on the month, because it's all about right now with form and whatnot. For Nations League, I'm going Promise David as the third. I just think in terms of the Kyle Laren backup stylistically, he's earned it. Like 13 goals, 5 assists, scored in Europa League against Ajax, scored against big Belgian clubs. Has to be Promise David. And right now I'm going Jason Russell-Rowe. This could change in 3 weeks. The MLS season's young. I liked what I saw from JRR week 1. I find stylistically, the way they've asked him to play at Columbus, it fits a bit more of a Jonathan David backup. Whereas a lot of the other guys listed are more out-and-out 9s, and all of a sudden it gets a little too crowded. And I think they want to look at Promise David. I think Jesse Marsch will have been really happy with the work he's put in and reward him with the call-up. And I think because of that, Gold Cup, you go Theo Bair, you go Tenny Oluwaseyi, you go Dio Mercy-Michel. I think he's shown enough intrigue in Portugal. He's kind of fizzled out a little bit, although he played a minute off the bench against Porto. He's still sticking around and in squads that they're going to want to bring him and see what he's about. He is a dual national. If you can cap tie him, it's a plus, and you can do that at the Gold Cup. And then, of course, Daniel Jebbison. And I think that would be a good sign of your commitment. Like, okay, Jebbison, you committed to Canada. Like, you got to earn your stripes. You got to go to a Gold Cup just because you're in a Premier League, unless you find form, and then it's a different discussion. But find a regular role for Bournemouth in terms of goals and minutes off the bench. Then I think a Gold Cup would be a great spot to see where Jebbison could fit in this picture.
If Dio Mercy-Michel makes the 2026 World Cup team, he and Sam Piet are doing Pharma Prix ads in Quebec, the French Shoppers Drug Mart.
I could definitely see that, as well as the RDS ads on the bus stops. I remember I was in Quebec City for the U Sports Women's Soccer Championship, and it was Lionel Messi, Kevin De Bruyne, and Samuel Piet. And very much one of these things is unlike the other, but all 3 in 2026 could be MLS players. That could be pretty crazy. But Alex, I know you and I predicted our 23 player rosters for the Nations League. We had a few differences, especially when it came to who we'd like to see. Pretty similar group of about 15 to 19 locks on the team. I had Matthew Choinière in the team, as well as Jaden Nelson, Tom McGill, and Luc de Fougeroles to round up my roster. You had Sirois Adekubi, Miller, Saliba, Osorio, Schaffelberg, potentially injured. Promise David and Jason Russell-Rowe. And then your cuts were, if fully fit, Choinière is probably there. If Schaff is injured, Nelson is up. Hoylett, Piet, Hebert, Zach Briot-Gard, and Tom McGill are potentials if injuries crop up. And then honestly depends on the forward depth when you start looking at some of the other forwards that you didn't include. I had Dion Mercy-Michel, Sam Piet, Jason Russell-Rowe, and Ali Ahmed as my first cuts. I don't think Ahmed has necessarily put in the consistent performances at club levels as much as he has been a bit of a darling for Jesse Marsch. Marsch did say that he wants him to get a little bit stronger on the ball, bulk up a little, at least in his upper body, and be a little bit stronger there. And I think that this potentially offers an opportunity to look at some of the other players while still having that top level, whereas Ahmed isn't necessarily starting in these games, and you can bring in other players to experience what's going to be a very intense environment, players that potentially have a higher ceiling than Ahmed has shown, at least recently with the Whitecaps, Alex.
Yeah, I can't see that. I think for me, I had Ali Ahmed as one of my locks. I only put 15 locks and then a couple guys on the bubble. Look, for Canada, since the Copa America, you can even argue it started at the Copa America. Like, he's been one of Canada's top 5, top 10 best players over that stretch of just guys who've consistently put on the shirt, elevated their performances. Like, it's a guy where Tajon Buchanan, like an Inter Milan winger, now Villarreal winger, was injured and then eased his way back in. And you're thinking, like, you don't even really miss the guy because Ali Ahmed's putting in that level of performance. I think that's more than enough to earn a role for this Nations League. Nations League, you want to put your best out there. You want to put your most comfortable too. Marsch spent a lot of time building chemistry, looking at where guys fit in. I think for Ahmed, it's going to take something drastic of his form dropping off for club and country, or like one of the guys behind him, like really taking over. I know it's fun to put Jaden Nelson in because he had the game of his life this past weekend. It was still one game and it was against 10 men and it was Portland. Like, Portland looks pretty awful, and who knows where they'll finish. Anything above 10th might look good based on what we saw in the first 15 minutes, even before the red card. So I think Ahmed's going to have a big role to play, and I think we'll see a lot of that decision-making with Marsch. Like, this is, at the end of the day, a chance to win a trophy. Yes, he's going to look ahead to the future, but also he wants to, make it competitive. Like, I think a guy like Promise David's a great example because he's gone out and earned it, but I don't think there's going to be any free call-ups for Daniel Jebbison, for example. But, I think that's something that fans might have to be ready for because I think Marsch is going to want to set a certain line of competition. He's shown it with Seegers, Nathan Salibas, Ahmed's, and I can't see that stopping now.
I'm totally waiting on Ali Ahmed to go full Jaden Nelson mode now that Ben has doubted him.
Well, I doubted Jaden Nelson when he signed with the Whitecaps. I doubted Jonathan David, of course, and he's been in stellar form in the 8 months since then. So Ali Ahmed is bound for a hat trick. Alex and I are in an MLS fantasy league with Brandon Q of Canucks Abroad, and so pick up Nelson this week and Ahmed because you know that they're going to be in form after I doubted both of them. But Brendan, when you look at the third goalkeeper position as well, it wasn't a great weekend, even for the second goalkeeper position or first, depending on how you look at it, for Maxime Crépeau. Who's that third keeper for Canada?
I'm surprised that your guys are so high on McGill because I feel like you've got 3-4 MLS guys.
Well, I've got Sirois as my third, and then McGill was my fourth. I think Ben had McGill as his third.
Yeah. I think Pantemis has proven that he deserves more minutes as a starter in MLS, and it's a rare situation, a very hockey type of 1 and 1A guys in Portland that Phil Neville seems to be, I don't say growing tired of, but he doesn't seem to rate Max Crépeau as high as we have in the past, and the high as John Herdman, or at least at the beginning Jesse Marsch did. So I think those 4 guys beat out McGill for me. And it just if Pantemis is getting minutes as he has been, I think that there's not a scenario where Max Crépeau isn't there, but very, very surely could be a reality where he's not the number 1 guy again. But I do think that Dane Sinclair is definitely there, so it's Sirois or Pantemis in the third spot for me.
I think Dane Sinclair right now, what we'll see. It's like he's definitely taken the inside turn towards number 1 in that race. I just think, part of it's been his own performances over the last, year, but I think Crépeau, the situation at Portland, we spoke about it a couple weeks ago, I think it was, and this week 1. I mean, it's one game. We'll see how it ages. But what worries me most with Crépeau from that game is he's a very confident player. You've seen it. Like, he's a guy who's not afraid to come flying out, like we say, do all that. And I just think of that, the second goal it was for the Whitecaps, or actually was it the first, where he just completely turned it over unprompted. And it wasn't like one where it was like a big defensive play. Like, he just straight up mishit it.
Yeah.
That was very uncharacteristic. And I think now it's something to watch, because clearly that competition with Pantemis, the fact that Neville maybe doesn't feel he fits into his system, etc., like, that's a sign that's maybe starting to weigh on Crépeau, and rightfully so, right? It's a big year and a half. He wants to start at the World Cup, etc. Something to watch. Crépeau's a strong guy mentally. I think he'll bounce back, but now the question it will only get hotter if, week by week goes on, if he loses his spot, if performances like that happen. Then you wonder, like I threw out there, do teams around the league try to trade for him? Mm-hmm. That throws another wrench into things. I think for Crépeau, it's clear though, that St. Clair has jumped into number 1, and we'll probably see that in Nations League. And number 3, I mean, it'll depend. I think it could depend on the week. Sirois, Pantemis. The one we got a lot of questions about, and I'm keeping an eye on, and it's probably the one surprise omission, was Owen Goodman. I know he's a dual national. Imagine he's keeping his doors open. You got to try to find a way to get his commitment. I think he's had a really exciting season in League 2. He's bright. He's on the books at Crystal Palace. If you can try to get him long term, he'd be a great play. But right now, 1v2 is quite a fascinating battle before even looking at that.
And from Andrew Kurjata, okay, serious question. I was thinking about the Canada-USA hockey game and wondering if a football match between these two countries is going to carry the same level of intensity and same level of weight. A lot of political surroundings from the Canada-USA games last week at the Four Nations face-off in terms of the hockey space. But Brendan, do you see that potentially in a CONCACAF Nations League final?
This is a great question, because one thing that you're going to see over the next year and a half, and you guys working in the industry, you probably already had these conversations, is you're going to see this blend between the regular soccer hardcores that are already in this space. I think all of us are excited for that semifinal against Mexico, which in a lot of ways could be a final and maybe is more of a test even than US in the actual final. I think the general public, what will stop them from truly getting excited is, what the hell is this tournament? Now, what the hell is the Four Nations face-off? That was just a created tournament to garner attention and to see best on best for the first time in a long time. The difference is hockey's in such a different place. So I think there'll be more intrigue, but I don't think you'd see the boost in the numbers that, let's say, American TV audiences saw for hockey. I think that was a bigger surprise. I don't think it would compare to that, but it would be a damn good time for it. I'd love to see it. U.S. and Canada in LA. I think it would get a lot more attention than a few years ago, certainly when they were in Vegas.
Yeah, I think it could be pretty intense. I don't think we're going to get the same sort of political tensions around it, because it's simply not one nation's identity at its core. Like, hockey for Canada is so existential to what Canada identity holds on to. And, Trudeau was watching the match, and Donald Trump was probably watching some of the game as well. At least he said that he watched overtime. So I don't think that's going to happen, especially, I don't necessarily think Trudeau has a One Soccer or a Fubo account. And I don't think Donald Trump could name anything about soccer, let alone other things. So I don't think that it's going to have that all around it. And that added a lot to it, even if the players don't necessarily reflect those same ideas.
Yeah. I look forward to that Alex Jones rant on my Twitter next. What the hell's the Nations League? If Christian Pulisic isn't the MVP of the Nations League, does it even happen? They're gonna give it to that guy from Bayern Munich. Yeah, sure. You know what they're into? I don't even want to go down that road anymore, but I feel like I should retire the Alex Jones.
I was going to say, we're going to go to a dangerous territory where might have to cut it out. But yeah, this question is a great one. I love that Andrew sent it. As soon as I saw it, I knew we had to throw it in there. It's different though, because at the same time, like, what's fascinating about the Canada-US hockey thing is, the reality is a lot of the guys on the Canadian hockey team ideologically might actually not be that far off from, some of the American guys. But then there's just such a national pride that comes out. Even a lot of little things, like a lot of them probably didn't care, like the fights, right? Like, those guys aren't throwing hands because they hated Donald Trump. They're just throwing hands because, look, it's hockey, emotions, riling up the guys, getting the crowd into it, right? That's just kind of the way they're operating. And it just kind of led to that moment. What's interesting in this case, like a lot of the Canada guys, like, this is a team filled of first, second, third generation immigrants, guys that have had such fascinating stories, who have really adopted Canada, as their home in a lot of cases. If they weren't born here, lots of great stories. Like for them, this case, they'd actually mean a lot more politically. I feel like, that guy really is a threat to what we represent and what's going on. But then you look at the way this Canadian team plays, especially under Jesse Marsch, they're just so focused on themselves, and in a good way. Like Jesse Marsch said it, right? That confidence, that cockiness, that swagger. Jesse Marsch isn't sitting there like, you just, guys, go out, do your thing, be dominant. That's how guys are going to take notice of you. So funnily enough, I think if this is John Herdman's Canada, like, I think I could expect some gusto, like some heavy tie. We've seen it, right? Like Kamal Miller trying to absolutely tear the legs off of Luka Modric. Like, he doesn't care. Like, I'm going to go out there and send a message. I think there's going to be less of that from Jesse Marsch, because he wants his guys to go out and prove it with their football. So if anything, I think any tension would have to come from the U.S. And even then, like, Christian Pulisic made a pretty strong statement in favor of Trump last fall. And even then, when he was asked about it, he's like, oh no, it's just a little TikTok dance. Like, he didn't even, because he saw with the American hockey guys, that added fuel, where they were asked, like, yeah, like they were so strongly in favor, and it riled up fans, it riled up Canadians. Like, people were pissed at JT Miller and all these guys. I don't think these US guys are going to do that either.
Look, you don't hold yourself back when you're getting excited about XG. Why would you pull yourself back from doing an Alex Jones impression there? You were so close. You started to gargle the phlegm. You got afraid, brother. You got afraid.
So now I got to do my Pulisic impersonation.
I was thinking, what would the mock be? Right. And I asked Jesse Marsch in the press conference after Suriname, which was the night after that. I said, did you have to talk to your players about doing any political celebrations? And I think, understandably annoyed that he had to answer the question. But to his credit, left no doubt as to where his allegiances and mindset were about what Christian Pulisic did. I wonder what the mock would be. Because the Whitecaps are doing WWE celebrations, I think it's whoever scores does the dance, and then someone sweet chin music kicks them to the jaw. I think that's the celebration.
I think I'd like that. We'll jump into a quick MLS is back as well. MLS returned in as chaotic a way as MLS possibly could. Jane Nelson, performance of the match day, didn't get the MLSsoccer.com performance of the match day. That going to Andres Dreyer for 2 goals in San Diego FC's debut. Tenny Oluwase almost scored the first goal of the season, but missed a couple good opportunities in a loss to LAFC. But thoughts on Nelson's debut? Whitecaps, of course, picking up a big win. TFC a 2-2 draw at DC United. Still haven't learned to mark Benteke on corners. Of course, the Golden Boot winner from last year, and a great performance from CF Montreal. But starting off with Nelson and the Whitecaps, Brendan.
Yeah, Alex, you can go first if you want, man. I was amazed by Nelson, to be honest, and we were texting kind of through the game there. I expected him to be able to make an impact on the team. I expect him to be able to earn a starting place. I didn't think he would be undeniably the man of the match day. I mean, there aren't too many guys that have performances like that in their career, let alone for him to come back to MLS after a couple of years where he was completely out of everybody's mind. What a way to remind everyone that as he kept saying, I'm here.
Yeah, well, I mean, heading into the season, I was doing some Whitecaps preview stuff, and one of the questions I had to answer was like, who's the new signing you're most excited about? I mean, not a lot to pick from, but I went Nelson, and what I said was, like, when it clicks, there's a player there. Like, there's just something super exciting. I've seen it for Toronto. I've seen it in Norway with Rosenborg. Like, there's a player there. Reality is, there's also going to be frustration. I think what we saw in this game is that player, that when it all clicks, like, wow, like, he's got speed. He's got an excellent left foot. He's got vision. He can torment defenders. Like, he plays 80% of this level going forward. You're ecstatic if you're the Whitecaps, because, like, he's running at guys in a way they haven't had other than Fafa Pico last year. But he also brings a little creativity. Like, he's going to pick out the passes, find his teammates. He's also going to take it himself. Like, it was fantastic. So I think for Nelson, of course, the reality is just going to be making that consistency, because on one hand, I'm not surprised, because for Nelson, I'm not looking at a player with a lack of talent. The reason why he's come back to the Whitecaps and maybe didn't stick as long in Europe as he could have is consistency. How do you get performances like this every week? How do you get your 6s and 7s out of 10s instead of dipping between 2 out of 10s and 9 out of 10s? Because man, like you see the talent with the Nelson. This guy you want to see playing for Canada. You want to see playing in Europe, but it's just finding that level. And if Jesper Sorensen can get anything like that going forward, you're laughing at the Whitecaps. Because all of a sudden, if you can get that out of Nelson, you can get, Ali Ahmed, who had a good showing against Saprissa in leg one in terms of running at guys and showing similar things, you'll be all right.
And Brendan, when you take a look at TFC's performance as well, Bernadeschi doing well. Earning a penalty, or setting up to earn a penalty that Larea drew and then scoring the penalty. Of course, Insigne didn't travel with the team, but what were your takeaways from Toronto FC? And then you can get into CF Montreal's 3-2 loss to Atlanta as well.
You think about the most important players for Toronto FC this year, and both of them put their names on the score sheet. And I think for Jonathan Osorio, you're expecting, there to be maybe a decline in his game. I think Canadian fans can be a little critical of him at times for not being a bigger version of, I think, some imagined position that he should fill and should play. For TFC, he always seems to deliver in the right moments and is one of those players that it's very hard to cheer against. You might dislike the team, but Jonathan Osorio makes it very difficult to cheer against him. I think Bernadeschi knows he has the opportunity to be the man. He was the only All-Star last year, and he's the only superstar on this team right now. And I think that, it's a good draw for them to build off of. The fact that they had some chances and kind of feel like they probably should have won it. And I think that they have the opportunity to have a better season than DC United this year. But considering, they're putting things together, it's not like Robin Fraser had months of a preseason. It's not like this was in place, when they bowed out on October 5th. I think that it's a pretty good foundation to be set. I think they're going to be okay. I know a lot of TFC fans are pretty nervous and skeptical. I would expect them to consistently be in a wild card spot in the Eastern Conference this season, and it might come down to the last final weeks. But I don't think that they're going to be languishing near the bottom of the conference as so many people fear.
And on Montreal as well. I mean, their second goal was a thing of beauty. Owusu looked as good as Emmanuel Latela, and Latela was brought in for $22 million. Of course, Latela gets the brace, and Edwin Mosquera gets the beautiful final goal as Atlanta beat them 3-2. But what do you take away from Montreal's performance?
I watched that one, and I was impressed by Owusu. I think that's what TFC thought they were getting. That's what TFC fans expected to get consistently. And it just seems like with Jaquil Marshall-Rutty, with some consistency, like I like Laurent Courtois a lot. And I feel like that the guys that have been in there in the previous regimes, there's been a lot of turnover, obviously. He seems to be able to get these guys to the next level. Caden Clark looks a hell of a player. They got a lot of exciting pieces. It's not just a handful of guys. You're not just hoping that Ramel Kyoto can carry them, or, Joseph Martinez find those 2015 boots again. It feels like they're a much, much stronger team.
And Alex, when you look at those two performances, as well as maybe the ceiling of the Whitecaps, given their opening week performance, where do you see these three Canadian teams after 90 minutes to open the season?
Yeah, for the Whitecaps, just a good start. Fun fact, they never won the first game of an MLS season under Vanni Sartini, so they're always playing catch up. So the last time they won their opening game was 2021 under Mark DeSantos. Funnily enough, it was Portland Timbers, and it wasn't. I think that was a neutral site game, I want to say, because that was 2021. So nice to see them just get 3 points, because so many years they're playing catch up. I think this will be good. Like they have a good squad, and now it'll be how can they find their feet under Jesper Sorensen. As for TFC, I think it was promising. I think what I love, just kind of Jonathan Osorio, like you mentioned, like, is there anything more certain in life than a Jonathan Osorio back post run? Like, he's so good at that run. Like, it's actually insane how he's made a career of just like that back post run, finding the space, knowing where the ball goes, and always being there. If the defender messes up, he knows where to be. If it's a perfect cross, like, that's an impressive skill for a midfielder.
Michael Bradley used to do that a lot too, though, right? Or am I just confusing am I rewriting history?
I mean, I guess so. I mean, he also had a bit more of, like with Osorio, it's fascinating because like he doesn't have a rocket of a shot. He doesn't have like, like Michael Bradley could rip it from 30-40. We've seen that with some of his goals. Like Osorio has scored so many goals. And for a midfielder, the fact that it's like Chicharito-esque box runs and finishing, like I find that so fascinating, and I think such an impressive skill, and a good reminder that he has as big of a role to play as anyone else in this Toronto FC team again. And it's a reminder that even as he enters his 30s, like he still has so much to give, because his best attribute is his brain. And as long as that's still firing and his legs can somewhat keep up, it makes him an interesting player. And I guess you just want to see that from other Canadian midfielders. And my one note on Montreal, like Nathan Saliba, if that's a sign of what's to come from this year, like his goal so well taken, that's what I want to see. Sometimes last year he was a little timid to get in the box and really be involved. He had a bit of that sauce, that swagger. That goal was so well taken, and lost in the Prince Owusu show. Great debut for Owusu, showing why Montreal wanted him. But I think some Nathan Saliba developments like that would be key.
And a few Canadians having success around MLS as well. Luca Petrasso looked good for CF Montreal in his debut. Jason Russell-Rowe got on the score sheet in a weird Columbus Crew match against the Chicago Fire, and the Fire look completely out of sorts at center back, even with Greg Berhalter on the sidelines. But Alex, were there any Canadian performances that really stood out to you in MLS this weekend, not on the Canadian clubs?
Yeah, I mean, nothing outrageous. It's good just to see Jason Russell-Rowe start and score in that game, right? Like mentioned, got a bit of a gift in terms of just one of the many errors playing out the back this weekend. He capitalized, great finish. Going to need to see a lot more of that. With Cucho Hernandez gone, Christian Ramirez, Russell-Rowe has big shoes to fill. So just getting a goal first week, very encouraged by that. Otherwise, some other ones, I thought it was interesting to see Kyle Hebert right away step in, getting a role under his new coach. Could be something to keep an eye on. When I was building my depth chart yesterday, Lucas McNaughton didn't start the first game for DC. I thought it was interesting because I mentioned earlier on the show, I thought he could. I think he has a big role to play. We'll see. But if Hebert can carve out a regular role for St. Louis, quietly he could become the next guy up if there's any injuries in that back line. So something to keep an eye on from a Canadian perspective.
And a little bit of news coming from the CPL as well. A question from Mike Whaley with two reports, Wanderers Notebook and Transfermarkt listing Kelowna and Windsor as probable CPL expansion clubs in 2026. Wondering if you've heard anything additionally and your thoughts as well, Brendan.
I said this before, and Windsor's my hometown. I don't think that's the right move next. You go two cities. I think Kelowna provides a lot of intrigue. I really think Saskatchewan and Quebec should come first before both of those places. But if Kelowna has the infrastructure, they've got the stadium, they've got the interest, then Kelowna seems like a great opportunity. I think that there's a better potential for success for another CPL team in Ontario, like in the GTA. I know that York haven't had the best start, but I think that would be better for the league than Windsor. I really hate to be so doubtful, but that's a market that I feel is very different than when David Kleniken was grew up there and was down there years ago, and when I grew up there. And I don't know if it's the right market for the CPL to go into now. I think that and I say GTA, but I kind of feel like Kitchener might be a better spot, and to create some more rivalries and a healthier spot than Windsor. That doesn't mean Windsor shouldn't get a team in the future, but we're talking about expansion for the first time since Atletico. Windsor's not on that list for me, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, ideally, Quebec is in the picture soon. You want it, something to work out there that sees Quebec's, be it Quebec City, be it Montreal, be it something of the like. That kind of goes without saying. In terms of these two markets, they're going to be interesting test cases, because the fact that Kelowna is maybe not one of the, well, it is, I guess, relative to BC, one of the major cities, but it's not like when you're looking across the country, one of the big cities. You think immediately more of that Halifax profile where, other than the junior hockey team, the Rockets, like a Kelowna team could be the interest, especially over the summer where there's no hockey. It's beautiful, vineyards, all that sort of stuff. And this could be a real good test case of, okay, like that market size. Can you find that where, like they've done with Halifax, it's been so great, it's become a great destination? And I'd be curious to see from Windsor. I mean, I'm less familiar with Ontario, like you mentioned. You prefer at Kitchener, but I think this could be a good test, because ideally, if we're talking in 20 years, Ontario's littered with clubs across different cities of this size. And the reality is, for expansion, especially now, you just want to get in the door wherever there's opportunities, wherever there's moments. And if this is the best situation in terms of stadium ownership, it's a good test run, at least, which provides data that could be good down the road for future.
And short Canadians abroad this week as well. But Promise David had a pair of assists and a top showing for Union Saint-Gilloise as they defeated Anderlecht 2-0 in a massive JPL clash, pushing up to 13 goals and 5 assists on the year. Charles Andreas Brim is also finding form for Almere City, scoring in Eredivisie action against Feyenoord. He has 1 goal and 2 assists in his last 4 games. Busy week in Canadian soccer. 2 outstanding dual commitments. The Canadian women's national team will jump into that as well. And now we'll jump into the Canadian women's national team as well. And their champions, Casey Stoney, already with a trophy with the Canadian women's national team, leading them to the Pinatar Cup. Just moments ago, they wrapped up a 7-0 win against Taiwan. Of course, she got her first win on the Canadian touchline, a victory over Mexico on the weekend, and Canada only conceding once in the 3 games. Not the most testing opponents, 0-1 draw against China. But Alex, what do you see from this tournament? We'll also get into some transfer news as well, but Canada with a trophy, even though they might not have heard of this one before.
Champions of the Pinatar Cup. You'll never sing that, right? No, I mean, I don't know if there'll be any t-shirts like that going up, but it was good. It was good in the sense that it was 3 games, 3 different opponents. You know, the China game off the bat, a bit more competitive, a bit tougher of a match. Canada got a stiff test. And then Mexico, always tough, physical match. Canada showed good resilience to get through, survive a lot of physical play, win a red card, and then get the win they felt they deserved in the end. And then this Chinese Taipei game at the end was just reps, getting some new players on the field, scoring goals, feeling confident. Not a whole lot you can take away. But for Casey Stoney, looking at this group for the first time, I think she can look at a lot of these players and have a better grasp of what to expect going forward. I mean, especially players like Mary Yasmin Aldu scores a beautiful, beautiful hat trick in this game. Emma Regan put in some top performances, just among others.
Yeah, Aladu plays as more of an outright striker than the number 10 that Casey Stoney was describing her as when she initially took the job. But a hat trick within 32 minutes today, certainly dominant performance for Canada against this Taiwanese team that just wasn't necessarily up to the level. Jordan Heidema almost had a penalty stopped, actually, a little bit unlucky for the Taiwan goalkeeper as well. But what do you see from Mimi Aladu, Jordan Heidema from this last game where they had basically control of the entire game?
Yeah, I mean, this was one where you want to, be ruthless, show confidence, go out and be super aggressive. And I think you saw that, especially from Aladu. She really just wanted to take the ball and make things happen. That's what she can bring to the table. I think the penalty was a great example. She steps up. There was some surprise maybe on the broadcast, and rightfully so, because we didn't know who would be stepping up to take a penalty. The fact she wanted it puts it away with conviction. That's the sort of attitude you want. And yeah, I think that was reflected in a lot of Canada's goals. If anything, I think at the end they kind of eased off the gas pedal. I think they could have probably pushed for more. I think credit has to go to the Taiwan defenders for how they locked things down and responded. But for Canada, I think you can definitely look at Aladu, that aggression. You want to see more of that. Hoydam as well. Her first goal was super well taken. She wanted to be in the box, wanted to score the goal. Jade Riviere was pushing forward. I think if you're looking at performances like that, that's what you want to see. Because this Canadian team, they've got pieces to attack, but it's sometimes a bunch about the willingness, the ability to do so, and having a few of those performances. It bodes well as Casey Stoney puts this system together.
And you said before the tournament as well that you wanted to see some changes in net and a few different things tried out with this Canadian team. What do you see on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I saw some encouraging moments. I mean, it was good to see each keeper get a game. That was kind of what I'd hoped for. And in the end, we got to see Pearl, we got to see D'Angelo, we got to see Sheridan. That was encouraging. The back line, I mean, Vanessa Gilles, we saw a lot of at the beginning. Vanessa Gilles things, not much to note there. She scores. What else is new? Water is wet. But it was good to see like Megan Reid go up, score a goal, overall have a good camp. Shalina Zadorsky step in, with Jade Rose out injured, it's good to just show that depth that, okay, even if Kadisha Buchanan's out long term, that there's options to step up. Megan Reid in particular feels like she could make some noise. Even we saw a glimpse of the future with Ella Huddy. I think that's someone where she may be a few years away from being a regular fixture, but it's good to know that she's around. She can step up if needed. So it's hard to fully gauge the defenders just because there weren't that many tests, although Mexico did really stress that Canadian backline in China as well. So it wasn't as if this tournament was without tests defensively. And for the most part, I had no complaints about how Canada defended.
So Canada leaves this first tournament with Casey Stoney with the trophy. It is the Pinatar Cup. It's been contested, I think, 4 or 5 other times. So it has a little bit of history to it, but very much the same vibes as when they won the Algarve Cup. I think it was back in 2014 or something around that point. It would have been nice to win the She Believes Cup because that seems to have a little bit more cachet in terms of the women's game as these winter tournaments go. But Casey Stoney said that Canada is planning to play some home games in the near future. Of course, it's a busy summer in women's football. Women's Euros coming up as well. It's going to be tough to book opponents, especially in Canada. And I'm not sure whether they want to go up against Brazil again. So what are some potential opponents that you could see for Canada, at least, looking at those European opponents in particular that are probably going to be a little bit busy?
Yeah, I mean, Europe is going to be tough. I mean, I imagine if you're going to want to get some European opponents, you're going to have to head over there, which could always be another option. I mean, they're obviously comfortable with it. They got a strong squad. I'd love to see a U.S. game this year. Yeah, I know for a friendly, Hema Hayes, Casey Stoney, some familiarity there between English compatriots, new coaches with their team, or at least newish in the case of Emma Hayes. I think that could be a good test for both teams to kind of see where they're at, because you definitely know 2026 when they meet at the CONCACAF Championship, it's going to be a fierce, intense battle with so much on the line. So I'd love to see a U.S. battle. I'd love to maybe see some more African teams. I know there's been some good tests against the like of a Nigeria. Maybe not Nigeria exactly, but there could probably be some teams like a Morocco who could make an interesting battle. And otherwise, I guess, some of these Asian teams, it could be good timing for maybe another Japan test, something along those lines. So I definitely think there's options beyond Europe. But yeah, I think ideally you just want to avoid a Brazil just due to familiarity. And I'm sure they'll find a way to sneak it in. But I guess if there is some other South American options, Colombia again, I know they played each other at the Gold Cup, but they were fun. They were something different. And Colombia's got so much attacking talent. It could be a good defensive test.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see exactly what these home games are. And Casey Stoney, of course, still waiting for her Canada home debut on the Canadian touchline. Some transfer news as well in the women's game on the Canadian side of things. Adriana Leon is coming stateside. She's joined the San Diego Wave, Casey Stoney's old team. She's leaving the Women's Super League over in England. What do you see in this move? It seems like it's going to be the right move because this might offer a little bit of consistency, which she was never really able to achieve in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, for Leon, it'll be getting minutes, getting reps. It's been a weird last few years between, when she was at West Ham doing well, makes the move to Man United, didn't work out. That weird loan stint to Portland, which was always short term, goes to Villa, finds some form there. But then this year just hasn't clicked at Villa. I mean, with San Diego, you just want regular minutes. You want reps, especially she's entering her mid-30s. If she's going to stay competitive, you see Clarissa Larissy have some good moments, scores a great goal today. There's, Aladou. There's Olivia Smith. She was just a menace for defenders to deal with. Competition's heating up. Leon needs to, play regularly and show she deserves to play and get regular call-ups for this Canadian team. So that's what she'll be focusing on. I think this is a good spot to do at NWSL. I am surprised the NSL didn't come knocking. I mean, in terms of a DP at her age for a new league, I feel like that would have been a very intriguing call. I have to imagine that based on that idea, you have to imagine Leon probably chose the NWSL herself, given her familiarity with the league. But I think with that in mind, if she's confident to make this move, hopefully she hits the ground running, because if not, I'm sure some NSL teams are probably thinking like that could be a very good pickup for sometime next year maybe. And
Canada's national team, not the only women's team in action. The U20 team has been scoring a lot of goals at the CONCACAF Championship, 22-0 against Dominica. That set a new record for Canadian soccer teams at any level representing the nation. The biggest win by any team at any level, but Other scores that were close to it were 21-0 wins by the Canadian women's national team in 1998 in Etobicoke. Charmaine Hooper and Amy Walsh played in that game. That was a 21-0 win over Puerto Rico. And then this same U20 roster played Dominica at the U17s last year and beat them 21-0 as well. So it took until second half stoppage time to break the record. But shout out to Richard Scott of Canada Soccer for pulling that one out in terms of a stat, because certainly a interesting game. I know you and I caught a bit of it on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, good for Canada beating what's in front of you. It sucks because no one likes to lose 22-0. Unfortunately, in tournaments where goal difference matters, you got to do what you got to do. It is a bit of a tough situation because you look and you think, could there be a better way to structure qualifying to avoid results like this? At the same time, I think what can't get lost is how good this Canadian team is. Like they were talking about on the broadcast, like Geneva Hernandez-Gray, like just made the move to Sporting, has been in the senior national team, has a senior national team assist. She's out here playing in this tournament for Canada. There's a couple others with pro experience, a lot of them, with just different experience. Kaylee Hunter about to make her debut in the NSL. Like it's cool that Canada is getting to a point where now they're having U20 squads, U17 squads soon too, I'm sure, where there's pro experience, there's players playing at a high level, and it shows that they're maybe, because for a while they were losing ground on the rest of CONCACAF, and I think it's good to know that they'll be able to start keeping up again. And it's just unfortunate in a case like this, Dominica was a team on their path, but hopefully Canada, once now that that's behind them, they can, go ahead, finish this strongly. Because it would be nice to see Canada compete with the US at the youth level again, because it really feels like the last few years it's just been a gulf that whenever Canada plays the US, it's just never close anymore.
Certainly a big week in terms of the Canadian women's national team, Canadian men's national team. MLS is back. Everything seems to be happening in Canadian soccer this week. But for Brendan and Alex, thanks so much for tuning in to Northern Fútbol. You can make sure to subscribe to Northern Fútbol on any of your favorite podcast platforms. We're active on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube as well on the 90th Minute YouTube channel. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll be back next time.